so pleased and happy and excited of having Jane here with us. We've been waiting for this moment for the whole year, pretty much. So thank you so much. If you don't know about her, that I'm assuming pretty much everybody knows about her. She's originally from Rio Hondo, Texas, or Hondo.
Rio Hondo.
Oh yeah, Rio Hondo. She's an artist, creative producer, and an activist living and working here in Austin. She's the founding director of Bus-Based ATX. If you're not familiar, it is a nonprofit that champions women and non-binary creatives, entrepreneurs, and community leaders. She also actively designs communication strategies and experiences for other humans. As a musician, she pulls sonic influences from the likes of Björk, Solange, and Frank Ocean, and she explores the South, politics, cellulite, and being a bad woman within her lyrics. She, since putting out her first 4-track EP, Grapefruit, this year, she has opened for OSHUN, Nomi Ruiz, Buddy Michael, among others. Her work has been profiled in publications like Texas Monthly and Forbes, and in 2017 she was inducted into the City of Austin's Women Hall of Fame. So yeah, pretty impressive resume just right there. There's plenty more of information that you can get at her website, JaneHervey.com. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah, I had a friend. Whoa, how hear you? Yeah, I'm really loud, so I don't know if I should. Is this too loud?
Or should I do this?
No, use the mic.
The mic? Okay. Thank you for reading my bio. That freaked me out to listen to it. Like Coca said, I'm from Rio Hondo, Texas, which is a really small town. Anybody know where that is? The 956? Anybody know the 956? Yeah, Brownsville? Okay. Anybody else know what South Texas is? Okay, cool. So I want you to envision the outline of the state, and then I'm from a little town that's at the very, very southernmost tip. It's very, very small, about 2,000 people live there. And I moved to Austin in 2011 for school, and I was... Thank you. And I was shocked. I was shocked for a lot of reasons. Where I grew up, creatively, we don't have very many resources, and beyond that, we're dealing with a lot of oppressive structures down there. I'm not going to get into that too much, but that led me to where I am today, using gender equality as a tool to create equitable creative spaces, but also as just an artist and as a writer, a lot of my influences are pulled from South Texas, coming from kind of an under-resourced background, and doing things on my own, having to DIY it, not having models or mentors or people to look up to. So today, we're going to talk about getting self-organized, and I'm going to share a sad story with you all before I do that. Are we cool? Are we game for it?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. How many people in here are creative? You all are, so for those of you who didn't raise your hand, you lost. Yeah, it was just, you lost the test. Everyone in here is creative. Who would call themselves like an artist, creative entrepreneur, designer, community leader, nonprofit professional? Just trying to get a feel for who's in the room. Who's trying to self-fund something right now?
Gonna be.
Yeah, gonna be, or like trying to make a sustainable living, something right now. Yeah? Who's just trying to figure life the fuck out? Most of us. Okay. So that's what this is gonna be about, and I'm gonna tell you why. So at the end of 2017, I was in a really, really terrible place, mentally, emotionally, financially, physically, so many different lenses to look at that terrible place. I had launched Bosses ATX, a nonprofit, in 2015, but in all honesty, it was just something I was playing around with. So it was this little side project that I was working on. I hired a few friends to help me out, and it was quickly gaining momentum and steam. And by the end of 2017, we had done like $70,000 in income and $70,000 in expenses, and it was all on my taxes. And I was freaking out. It put me in another tax bracket. I was working like 40 hours a week on that for free, on top of working my own full-time job, and my full-time job had become the safety net for this nonprofit project I was working on. Nothing made any sense. I was working like 80 to 90 hour weeks. I wasn't making any art. I hadn't done a public performance as a musician in a few years. And it just felt antithetical to who I was. I felt like I was losing sense of myself. And I was also struggling with depression and anxiety. So again, I told you I was gonna tell you a terrible story. It was a bad time, and I quit my job on a whim due to stress in September of 2017. And I thankfully had been building up a savings, so I wasn't too scared, at least from a financial perspective. But I knew I had a very small window of time to figure out what to do with Bastos ATX. I needed to figure out how to make it, one, sustainable, two, something that I wasn't running myself into the ground with day over day over day. And then three, I needed to clarify where I stood with the project by itself. I needed to figure out what to do with it. Does it need to become a registered charity? We were already a nonprofit, but what did that look like? How was I going to restructure the budgets? How, if we were going to have full-time staff at some point, how was I going to raise, $400,000 in 2 years to do that? So I had all these different problems, and I don't know if it was desperation or out of survival, but I was like, there's got to be some sort of model I can look to, some sort of way of figuring this out. So I started asking friends for strategic plans, like how are you making sense of your future with your organization or with your project? How do you make sense of yourself as an artist? I signed up for this leadership camp in Rhode Island called Practice, where they teach you how to be a human being and an artist and all sorts of different things. So it's on this journey of healing from burnout, healing from depression, figuring out how to make a full-time living as an artist, but also how to make this nonprofit I really believed in sustainable. And after 2 years of research, I came up with this thing, which is what we're going to do today all together. It's essentially a framework for getting in touch with the data you collect as a human being. Does any of this make any sense at all? Are you like, I'm fine, I'm feeling this? Like, I collect data on a day-to-day basis. We're feeling it, we're down with data? Okay, cool. So, as someone who's self-funded, as someone who doesn't come from a background that has taught me how to make sense of money, or has even taught me how to deal with things like mental health or conflict, who really wishes that there had been a conflict resolution class in high school? Like, what the fuck? Why did we never get that? I don't know what was going on with that. So, who knows? Who knows? Texas got to get it together. But I didn't have any tools or mechanisms to understand the things that were going on in my life. I didn't have a framework. I didn't have a way of making sense of the challenges in front of me, but also who I am. We live in a world right now where we're constantly having information shoved down our throats. Information overload. Some of y'all are nodding your heads and other of y'all have blank stares. You know what I'm talking about. You're coming up against other people's identities every single day, which is just a reminder as to how much you don't have your own figured out. This is surely a feeling everyone in this room has had. And if you don't agree, then it'll happen one day to you. And then you'll think back to this moment and be like, she was right. She was right. And so, how do we make sense of ourselves? How do we make sense of the projects and plans that we want to achieve in life? And how do we do that without getting all, it's not just about tapping into our purpose and our divine sense of self, right? It's how do we do that and make money and balance budgets and communicate what we're trying to do to other people? That's where this little thingy comes in. So what we're gonna do today is go through this guide I've created called the Self-Organized Guide. Does everyone have something to write with or a phone to take notes on? It needs to be something that you'll look back at later. So if you are a Google Doc, Queen, King, Joker, whatever term you identify with when it comes to all of the different regal and royal entities on the card deck. Please take something that you will look at later. So if you are using a notebook you've never used before and it's going to sit under the car seat for the rest of the year, use something else. All right, we're all gonna look at this later. Okay, cool. So this self-organized guide, you're gonna write down the questions I'm gonna ask you, and then you're gonna answer them, and then we're just gonna keep going and keep going. You've already done this for Solange. She's here again. And we're gonna keep going and keep going, and by the end, I'm gonna ask you a big question, and we're gonna share them all together. But before we get started, does anybody have questions for me about all this mumbo jumbo I just put out into the world for you?
Have you ever tried using like something like Kickstarter or Patreon or any kind of crowdfunding?
Yeah, I haven't, but I've researched it. Kickstarter's pretty cool. I think they're the most artist friendly, in all honesty. But that's actually something that I decided not to do that because I felt like I had different resources available to me and that I was going to try first before doing Kickstarter. But that's totally a viable option for funding a project. But yeah, we'll move through that. And I should also note, I told that terrible sad story and then didn't end with like the ha-ha. This is the first year ever in Bosses Texas history as an organization where we're gonna hit about $250K in revenue and $230K in expenses and be able to invest in future staff. We hired 3 new positions this year, which is really exciting. So this shit works. Yeah, thank you for that. I love the enthusiasm. And I wanna just remind everyone that this is a framework and you are the expert of your own experience. So you might disagree with advice that's shared in this room today or different ways of looking at things that are shared in this room today. That's totally cool. I would rather you approach this with like, okay, I'm a living human being with data that exists within me, and I'm gonna add this to my lexicon of life tools, and I will choose when or not or if I use it. Okay, cool. So before we get started, because this can get a little overwhelming with all the questions, I want 3 things. You're doing big work. No one here in this room knows more than you, is doing better than you, is more intelligent than you. We're getting rid of all that. So for the next 45 minutes of us going through this exercise, please do not shit on yourself. All right? We do that as artists all the time. We stop ourselves because we get ahead of it and we're like, oh, I don't know why I'm doing this. I don't know why this is for me. This is not for me. None of that. None of that. We'll just get rid of it. If you have that thought, just put it aside, and you can totally have an existential crisis later after this. The second, you are not required to be all of yourself at once. So we might go through some things in this exercise that you're like, I have never ever done that before. I will never be good at that thing. I didn't even realize this was something I should be thinking about. That's okay. You're learning, and you could be those things one day. You could never be those things one day. You could hire someone to do those things for you one day. You're not required to be all the things all of the time. And you might be like, oh, well, I want to be a painter, but I'm not a painter now, or whatever that looks like. Just your futures are endless. Your possibilities exist in multitudes. And then the last is that it's okay to change. So you might write down some things today while we go through this exercise that don't apply when you wake up tomorrow. And you may be like, who wrote that? That's okay. That is also okay. You are welcome to audit and edit and adapt. That is the whole purpose of us doing this exercise, is I hope you leave here with the ability to audit, edit, and adapt to conflict and to circumstance and to change and to different budgets and bad relationships and things falling apart and people coming together and hurricanes. We're trying to make everybody in here as resilient as a Texas sable palm, all right? That's the type of energy we're trying to manifest right now. Okay. If you don't know what a Texas sable palm is, you can look that up later as well. All right. These are all questions we're gonna get through, but I don't want you to write them down just yet, but visuals. Visuals are important. Okay. Who are you and what do you do? Write down this sentence. Who are you and what do you do? Write down this question, because you're going to read through this later, and you're going to want to remember what the questions were. Who are you and what do you do? This just needs to be 2 or 3 sentences. Don't overthink it. Just needs to describe who you are, the characteristics of your work. Maybe you don't know the answer to this question. That's okay, just write revisit later. That's fine too. Who are you and what do you do? Oh, and before we keep going, there's 2 ways to do this exercise. You can do it as an individual, as a person, Or if you're trying to open a business or organization, you can do it through the lens of that business or organization, or artistic practice. Like, you can choose. Does that make sense? Who's doing it individual? Who's doing it organizational or business? Okay, right, cool. So yeah, choose your lens. Who are you and what do you do? So when I was doing this in 2018, at the beginning of 2018, trying to figure my shit out, I had no idea what to put here, and my statement was revisit later. So I didn't know what my relationship was to all these different projects and the work that I was doing just yet. So again, totally okay. But now, what I put here is that crazy bio. Go right here. So I felt good about that. I made some progress on an individual level. But again, we're just taking inventory. There's no wrong answers to this. So just write something down, even if it's a note to come back to it. All right, next question. Why do you do what you do, and who are you trying to serve? And I would be very specific here. You want to write down the overall reason for doing the work that you do. So like, what's this thing? Like, why? Why do you do this work that you do? And then I want you to write down the people and stakeholders involved in your work. Who are they? All of them. Who are all the people and stakeholders involved in your work?
These are good questions.
Thanks. So your why should address the problem you're trying to solve or the solution you'd like to see in the world, but it can also be as simple as, I like to make art. It brings me joy. Doesn't have to be anything super complex, but just really why. And maybe you don't know why. That's another revisit later. Anybody want to throw out their why?
I am an artist because it's the most human and hopeful thing I can do.
Damn straight. Anybody else?
I'm compelled to do so and it makes me feel alive.
I'm compelled to do so and it makes me feel alive. That's a great reason. Anybody else?
Make all people free.
To make all people free. Anybody else? Cool. So when I did this for Boss Babes in 2018 and for myself, I was like, I'm doing this because I believe gender equality is a tool for creating resilient communities. That's my why. It took me a long time to arrive at that sentence, but I was like, that's my why. And then when it came to thinking about my music, I was like, well, I make music because I have to survive. That's the only meaningful and authentic way I have to express myself. And then when I was thinking about my studio practice, because I do consulting and do communications experience design, it was like, I do this because I like to solve problems, and I like to solve problems in a way that costs less money. I'm interested in saving money for people. So just some examples. And make sure you're writing the questions down because you're gonna have to go back. Okay, what are your resources? This is a question oftentimes we're thinking about what we need, but we're not applauding ourselves for what we have or what we've amassed within our career, what we're trying to do. So what are your resources? Here, I want you to write down your skills. I want you to write down the things you know or could be an expert in. I want you to write down the things, spaces, and communities and people you have access to, the places you could go for financial help, the time that you have available. Time is a resource. All of those things, write them all down. And again, you're going to come back to this later, so you might miss some stuff, but what are all of your resources? Yeah, so I do this whole thing every 2 months for all of my projects, my audit. And you're gonna have to spend a lot more time on this, but we're just gonna set the foundational exercise down and get to it. Write them all down. We're gonna call this your circle of competence. That's just what we'll call it. It's a map of your available energy. It's a map of all the things that you know, the things that you've got a grip on. It's the things that you're good at or can rely on in some way. So some of my resources in 2017, 2018, in that dark time, is I was like, okay, I have a community to rely on. I also have access to businesses and larger companies that are interested and invested in what I'm trying to do. I'm really good at graphic design. I'm good at improv. I don't have a full-time job anymore, so I've got some more time on my hands. I have a good circle of creatives that I can reach out to if I need to source new services. There are all sorts of things that I put here. I had enough savings to get through like 2 months of making no money at all. That was a resource at the time. But then I had to go through my needs. What do you need? So whether this is for yourself or for a project, like, why are you here tonight? Like, what do you need? What are you looking for? What do you need? And I want you to think earnestly about what you need. And I want you to look back on what you wrote in this why, and what you wrote in your resources too. Like, these things you're trying to do, this project, this artist you're trying to be, like, what do you need to do this? Like, why are you here? What are you looking for? What does your work require? These people you're trying to serve, this community, these stakeholders you just listed out, what are their needs? And be specific. And again, it doesn't have to be grand. It could be like, I need to have access to a therapist. Or I need to make $200 more a month. Like, what do you need right now, like, for real, in your body, in your life?
Vacation.
I need more vacation time.
Health insurance.
I need health insurance. Any other things you want to throw out?
Stable partner.
I need a stable partner. That is that's a big one.
Another car.
I need another car.
I need more mental energy to mentally power what I'm doing.
I need more energy, more mental energy.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What happens like when you feel like what you need is actually what your stakeholder needs, and so you only need it because someone else needs it?
I think that's oftentimes what comes up in community work a lot. Or I don't know if, are you meaning in that context? Like
How do you know the difference?
Well, I think for this exercise at least, I think you should be interested in both. Because if you're trying to do a particular project and these people you're trying to serve or this mission you're trying to serve, they need a particular thing, you're gonna have to figure out, right, like where that thing comes from or whether or not your work can reasonably achieve that need. And I think that's a very difficult thing, because sometimes when we're trying, like none of us are actually, we're all reaching toward an idea, right? And we're all reaching toward a possible future. And so all those things are work in progress. But yeah, I would write that down as a need. But it sounds like you know it's not personal.
Well, it takes time.
It just takes time.
Yeah, to realize that.
Yeah. All right, we wrote down needs, desires. So this could be access to funds, access to networks, new ways of thinking, better ways of working, more flexibility, more time, less pride, aka humility. Map out what you could use more of and note why you need these things to do the things you're here to do. And for those who are like, I don't know what my needs are, that's okay. That means that you just need more time to research, record data within your industry, observe the environment you're working within. So make a note to start collecting that data and better studying the conditions that produce your best work and the best results for the community you're trying to serve. So that might be the first place, that might be the need you have. Also, I'll make sure Big Medium sends this later, so you can look back at it. All right. What do you value? with all of these previous answers in mind, what are your values? What do you care about? What are the values that show up in your work? Or that you'd like to show up in your work? So for example, Boston ATX, we have a lot of values, but we've narrowed down that there's 5 key values that unite all of our programs, and they also unite the way that we approach problem solving and working in groups. So we value arts empowerment, creative entrepreneurship, diversity and equality, personal and professional curiosity, and collaboration. It took us a long time to get to those, but we had to start by writing out, like, what are all the different things? So those are the 5 things that, if you look at our work and you look at the way we're making decisions, those values show up. And we've arrived at those terms because they're terms we can all agree on as a group in a community working on things. We all know what they mean. We can all agree on how they're showing up. So if you're doing this as an individual, obviously you're not thinking about it in a community context, but when you write down the words that you value, like, what do they actually mean to you? What are your values? And again, if you need to think on them, you should make a note to do that too. Okay, so you should have just answered all the previous questions. I hope you did. I hope you wrote something down. Were you still writing? Am I going too fast?
No, you're fine. I'm writing down.
Okay, cool. Okay, good. How do your values measure up against the resources that you spend? So looking at the resources that you have amassed to do this work that you're doing, to be this person you are, this artist you are, I want you to think about how you spend your time each week, how you spend your money. Maybe you're like, I have no idea. Well, it's time to find out. Begin ballparking. So I want you to write down, like, all of your expenses, practically and emotionally. Where do you spend your time? Where do you spend your money? If you had to assign these percentages, what would that look like? So I have an example here. Like at Boston's ATX, we spend 32% on operational staff, 16% on rent administration fees, 24% on program production expenses, 28% on artist commission and community job fees. And then when we spend our time, it's like 30% program execution, 30% programming and research, like curation, that kind of thing, 30% community management, and then like 10% fundraising. So when I first did this, and I was like hurting for money, it was 0% fundraising. So I was like, dang, I really need money, but I'm not spending any of my time there. So yeah, write these down. Give yourself some ballparks. What does that look like for you? Where are you spending your time based on these things you're trying to achieve? Where are you spending your money? I think it depends on the project, but I do this as like a weekly. This is like.
Perspective you want now? Are you saying like a month?
Yeah, I think a month is good. Like in any given month. And now that you've written a couple of things down and you just put this on paper, I want you to look back at your values you just wrote down before. And I want you to look at these percentages you wrote down and where do they show up? Do you spend your time on the things you say you value or the things you say you're trying to do? And ask yourself earnestly and honestly. So when I did this exercise, or was starting to figure this out in 2017, 2018, the answer was no. They weren't showing up anywhere. I was spending most of my time freaking out on social media. I was spending like 20 hours a week answering customer service emails for the nonprofit. I was not investing any of my time in like researching new operational strategies, or researching new ways to fundraise, or creating operational policies and culture guidelines for the organization. I was doing a lot of marketing. I was doing a lot of customer service and communication. I was doing a lot of program and curation, but I was missing huge chunks of the pie for the places that I needed to go and the things that I wanted to do. So think about that. Where are your values and this thing you're trying to accomplish showing up in your time and in the things that you're spending money or resources on?
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So what you say is, if you're spending more time, like, let's say for example, networking, right? Do you feel like you should spend more time, like, investing in, like, thinking about what you should be doing, or is networking a good thing?
Well, I think that's why looking at this holistically is what I'm arguing we should all do, is that networking on its own is a good thing, right? We all know we need to network. But if you have 10 hours a week to spend on your arts practice and 8 hours of that is networking, I'd say that's not a good use of your time, right? Or your energy. Because that networking is not the only thing you need to be an artist. But maybe let's say one of your goals that you wrote down in this deck is like, I'm trying to get a body of work I've already created out into the world. Well, then maybe you spend all 10 hours of your week networking and pitching. So I think it's less about there being a finite way you approach this that's static and doesn't change, and it's more so, how do you adapt the way that you spend your time and money based on the things that you need and the places you're trying to go? And the things you say you value, right? So in looking at what my life was like back then, I was doing the best I could at the time with the resources that I had, but it genuinely and honestly wasn't enough. And I kind of knew that. I mean, have you ever felt, I think we've all felt that way before. You're like, I know this isn't working. Like, I know this is not how this needs to be. I think that's a real and genuine feeling. And so instead of spending 80% of my time on customer service emails and trying to keep up with this like huge behemoth of a social media following that the organization had developed, I was like, I need to start spending 50% of my week on research. For operational development strategy.
Right.
And I don't do that now. I'm not spending 50% of my week on operational research and strategy, but I've adapted since then. So I think about it in that way. Like for the things you need right now and the stuff you say you're doing and the values you say you hold, what does that need to look like? This is obviously a bigger question as well. Okay. Still got you? All right. How do your values inform your decisions? So before you launch into this question, I'm going to read something out real quick because I think it's very important. But knowing where we have blind spots is not something. How do you know what you don't know, right? You don't. That's the thing. You don't know what you don't know. And you will never know what you don't know because you don't know it yet. And that's oftentimes how we're all moving through life. We don't know what we don't know yet. So the best way that you can prepare yourself for being outside of your circle of competence. So like who feels right now like they're outside of their circle of competence? You mapped out all these resources, but you're trying to do something that's outside of all the resources you already have. Anybody feeling that way or has felt that way before? Okay. So when we're outside of our circle of competence, when we're trying something new, when we're doing something and making decisions that we've never made before, that new moment, I'm embarking on starting a business, I'm going to try to take my art to the next level, we're outside of our circle of competence. And so that is a huge factor on our decision making. That's when we make bad decisions. So here are 7 factors that happen when we make bad decisions. These are all the 7 factors typically present in like a chaotic world disaster, like the Hindenburg, Pearl Harbor. All these factors are present in any given hospital operational room at any time. Where all life's major mistakes happen, these 7 factors are typically present. So the first is being outside of your circle of competence. The second is stress. The third is rushing or urgency. Then it's fixation on an outcome, so like trying to reach a particular thing as opposed to figuring out what you're doing every day to reach that thing. It's information overload, having too much to process, too much to move through, too many things to balance. Being in a group where social cohesion comes into play, so maybe like you're just moving along in step because everybody else is doing it, so we're all just gonna do it together, right? That's another time we make a bad decision. And being in the presence of an authority. So someone you perceive to be an expert and you just trust because they're the authority and they know what's best, even if what your gut's telling you is a little bit different. So acting alone, if any of these things are present, acting alone, any of these are powerful enough for you to make a bad decision, and then together they dramatically increase the odds that you're unaware you've made a bad decision or a poor mistake. And everyone's probably like, I feel all those things every day at some point. Yeah, you can't avoid them. We experience these things at any given time, and they're just the nature of the human experience of trying to do something. So when we think about how our values inform your decisions, what we're trying to do is develop policies and decision-making tools that hold us accountable and that help us develop checks when we're met with new information. So I want you to think about that as you're looking at just all this stuff you've written down. Like, these decisions that you're making with your work, like, how do your values inform your decisions? Like, do you stop and ask yourself? Do you have policies that you can lean on when times are tough or you're stressed or trying to figure out what to do with a big opportunity or new money that's come your way? What does that look like? So for example, at Boston's ATX, we have some policies. Like, our programming is affordable and flexible. We believe in giving and receiving honest, positive, and or negative feedback. We respect the organizations and each other's value and autonomy. We clearly define and set boundaries or deadlines. We prioritize the voices of women and non-binary people. We prioritize the voices of emerging, new, and re-emerging creative entrepreneurs and community leaders. We prioritize Texas. So those are some of the things that, like, if we have to make a decision about whether or not something is for us, we're considering those types of things. Is it affordable? Is it flexible? Are we, engaging in this collaboration? Do we both feel like we can give honest feedback? So think about that with your work and the decisions that you're making. Like, what comes into play for you? And this is a big question. This is not an easy question. And maybe you're like, I don't have any policies yet, so write a few down. What do those look like? What are some of your policies? Oh my God, I spelled the word right wrong.
Well, you didn't spell it wrong, but you used
I
the wrong
spelled
right.
it, yeah, I used the wrong right. And again, we can revisit all this later. But yeah, write down a few potential policies that come to mind. So next question is, how do you work with others? Maybe you don't, which is fine. Who here currently has like a collaborator that they work with? Some capacity or community that they work with? Cool. So yeah, how do you work with others? How do you create environments that allow others to work alongside you? What are your methods of communication? How do you construct timelines and ways of doing things that can be followed and or used by others in a team setting? Is your work collaborative? Do the people you work with have the tools that they need or the information they need to make decisions with you? How do you work with others? And this question can be hard because oftentimes I feel like this happens a lot in creative communities. We're like, that person was terrible to work with. They didn't answer my email in time, or I just wanted to collaborate, and you know what, collaboration sucks, and never doing it again. And we get all these different narratives. You hear all of it in creative communities often, especially in like artist communities where people make projects together and things like that. But to be honest, we're all terrible collaborators. As human beings, it's not something we're really good at. Communication is relatively new in our existence as a species, and we're still figuring it out. So think about this question. If you are trying to work with someone else for the project you're doing, how do you work with others? Like, do you give other people tools they need to work with you? If you're in a community setting trying to communicate this idea, this mission you have, like, do they have the tools they need to understand it, to access it? Like, what does that even look like? How do you work with others?
Is there such thing as like working with the wrong people? Like,
Oh, for sure. Getting into this, in how do you work with others, I think values are a decision-making tool, right? So if you have policies and values in place and you're like, I believe in mutual respect. That's a value I hold. And for me, mutual respect looks like communicating if a deadline can't get met, right? And like being open and honest. And if you're working with someone whose idea of mutual respect is just pretending that deadlines don't exist, then that doesn't make them evil or bad. It just means they're not a good collaborator for you, right? And that's kind of how these things can be used as well. But we'll get into that in a little bit too. Yeah, how do you work with others? How are others working with you? How do you feel about your collaborations right now? All right, so I want you to read through everything you just wrote. We just took inventory of who you are, what you're trying to do, why you're here, who you're trying to serve, what you have access to, what you need. I want you to read through everything before you start answering this question. Read it all. I want you to read all the stuff that you wrote down. Maybe you're reading and you're like, oh shit. That's a good thing though. But read it all. What do you say you value? What are some of your policies? Maybe you don't have policies. Read it all. And then sitting with this stuff, sitting with this inventory that you just wrote down, what can you do with what you've got? These needs that you identified earlier, that you're trying to meet, that you're trying to reach, what can you reasonably do with what you got? What is the most realistic next step for this big problem you're trying to solve, or even this small need of yours that you're trying to reach? And you're probably thinking, like, what is this thing that we just made together? We just answered all the questions to a standard strategic plan. So this little tool, this like way of self-auditing and asking yourself questions and answering them, it's a way of bringing the data that exists inside of you, that you're collecting every single day, to the surface. It's something that you can use to keep track of where you're going, where you're headed, what you're currently doing, where you're trying to get. And that's all a strategic plan is. It's an audit of what you currently got going on, where you're currently pulling resources from, and where you're trying to go. To look at operational capacity, to look at who you are, what you're trying to do, and what you're trying to serve. And so what I'd argue is that with this beginning strategic plan that you have made, what can you do next? What do you need to track? What do you need to create? Where do you need to pause and start again? What do you need to dedicate more time to? Where is your work not aligning with your values? Or maybe where is a collaborator not aligning with your values? Or a project not aligning with your values? How can you make better use of your resources to do things, create things, and give things that better align with your values? How can you pivot toward meeting some of your needs and the needs of your work? And what systems or structures may you need to establish or challenge to accomplish your goals? And I want you to get rid of that little voice in your head right now that's thinking about all the different things that you're going to have to do and all the different things that you're not doing right now. I want you to just shut that voice up and think about the most reasonable thing you can do next. Like, what are you going to do tomorrow or tonight after this? Like, what are you going to do? And if anyone is bold enough, I'd love for you to share what you do, what your problem is, and what you're doing next.
I'm gonna make a healthy dinner.
Z's gonna make a healthy dinner, which is good. If you need more, what is your need or problem right now?
Not taking care of myself. Like,
Not taking care of yourself. You make a healthy dinner. Yeah, that's a good first step on the way. Other folks?
I want to start a business that helps people like connect. That's the problem.
And what are you gonna do next?
Well, I'm here, so. But this is like one step, you know, so I'm trying to figure it out, so that's the next step, trying to actually figure it out instead of like, you said get overwhelmed with things and just shut down.
Yeah, so it sounds like you need to collect more research.
Yeah.
That's like your most reasonable next step, is you need to create more research on this thing you're trying to accomplish and do. Anybody else?
I've been looking for a few years in holistic mental health, and I started recently on a project that's really more of a foundation in the way that art is a vehicle for mental health in society. So I'm working with an artist on a fundraiser. Right now I'm working with the Alzheimer's Association on it because I know that I've been able to help people with dementia recover, and I started there just because like that's the hardest group. You know, if you can help them recover, you can help just artists who aren't taking care of themselves recover in like easy groups. So, but I think that like what's a challenge for me is like the part of me that's an artist is really pushed aside because I'm organizing and really being a manager. Also I'm having a lot of trouble like defining like roles and you know, it's just
So what are you gonna do?
yeah, well, you know, the thing that really leapt out at me when you were talking is I'm gonna take a stab at like defining like what I need to get out of this and what's mine. You know, because one of the things that I saw happening, and this is gonna sound really terrible, but I had this meeting today and I kind of got the feeling that the person that I'm working with was being really mercenary and was just gonna kind of like come and walk out the door with like all of my contacts, connections, resources, like all that stuff that you were listing as resources. I really saw that her was like, she was like mining, like she was gonna help facilitate the art event, but I felt like she was trying to leave with all that stuff that's really what I bring to the table. And I feel like I need to protect all that stuff. And in a way that still maintains a collaborative environment. And because I don't want to be paranoid, but I also want to create a clear boundary, you know?
Yeah, so it sounds like you need like a framework and some rules of engagement before you work with others, some policies.
Yeah, I'm not too far into this to do that now either. So I think that's what really
Maybe a lawyer and a non-compete.
Yeah, a lawyer and a non-compete. All right, who else? I saw a hand back here.
I'm a therapist starting a private practice, and my problem is kind of needing to start a business in general. But
And by starting a business, do you mean like making that like something you can financially live off of? Is that what you mean?
yeah. So I like the question about values because it reminded me that the work that I do, what I care about, what I value is relationships, and what I'm not doing because it scares me is making these important relationships and connections with all sorts of people all around. So that's my next step.
So start there.
Yeah.
It's a big one. Okay, who else?
Hi, I'm a journalist, specifically music, and my problem is I have so much social energy, and I can't get rid of a lot of it because when I work alone, remotely, which I hate. I don't recommend working remotely, honestly, but so my next step, I think, is to collaborate more, to make that social part of the work itself.
Yeah, that sounds like. Any other ideas people have for her?
Networking.
Yeah.
That's how.
Or join a co-working
I
space.
feel like I'm working.
What was that?
Join a co-working space, maybe.
Right, I thought about that. It's
Something
just a
cheap,
little
like $100
expensive.
a month. Austin
Yeah.
School Film does like $25 a month. I don't know if anybody knows that.
Oh, I didn't.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway.
Thank you.
Craft is $60 a month.
Craft is $60 a month. Okay, other ones. No, wait. Come on, y'all.
I'm an actor starting a media design company, and I'm not stepping fully into my potential, so I procrastinate a lot and wait till the last minute. And I get extremely overwhelmed from everything being thrown in my way, and so tonight I'm going to go home and prepare for the early morning that I have instead of checking out and throwing away my self-care.
Good one. Did anybody run into like some like, wow, my next step is actually too huge? Anybody run into those? So when I did this, my next step was way too huge. My next step was like, I have to fundraise $400,000. And I knew that after I did all this. I was like, well, you know, there's a lot of problems going on, but if I really start to peel back why there's so much stress, why there's so much rushing, why there's so much urgency, why, you know, we're making decisions the way we are, a lot of it was coming down to scarcity of funds. It was like, well, that mistake happened because we had to use this, and that we had to use that because we didn't have enough money, and it was just this big loop for me. And I was like, and I was working a full-time job because I couldn't pay myself from the project. There was, you know, it was just this big loop. So I was like, dang, if I'm gonna like actually properly resource this thing, I'm gonna have to fundraise $400,000. But as I told y'all, I wasn't spending any time on fundraising. That was entirely out of my circle of competence. So I was like, that I can't do. I cannot do it. I can't, like, that's a completely not feasible next step. So I had to peel that back to what I could do, which was like, okay, you can't fundraise $400,000 in the next year, but you know what? I could fundraise $500 by the end of 2017. I could try it, and I could do it. And that's something based on my resources, based on the people I had access to, based on the solutions I was willing to try, the little bit I was able to get out of my circle of competence, my comfort zone. I was like, I could try for 500 by the end of 2017. And then I did 5,000 by the end of 2017. And then 2018 came around, and I was like, I'm gonna shoot for 50,000 by the end of this year. Shot for 50,000, only did 40K. And then this year I fundraised 80K. So I'm still not at 400K. I'm still not even remotely there yet, but I had to set my sights a little shorter. And realized too that there was no way I was going to pay myself full time from the nonprofit without capsizing it and stressing myself out. So I was like, okay, I've got to figure out how to make a full living on doing just like an extra 10 hours of work a week. So I started doing consulting, and I started recruiting different people, different clients in that area, and figuring out what my services were. Now keep in mind, like, none of that was perfect. I spent like 6 months freaking out, and I had a little cushion of savings to work with. But now I'm at a point here in 2019 where I've got a stable clientele for consulting services. I do communications and experience design. I'm spending half my time on the nonprofit. I'm still not there full time, but I'm taking a marginally larger salary each time and getting closer and closer and closer. And so if you ended up with this very large number, with this really big problem, that's great, name it, write it down, but what can you actually do? That's the question I want you all to think about. Like, maybe you can't get all the way there, that's totally cool, but what can you actually do? Today, tomorrow, next week, etc. And I know you had your hand up back there.
Yeah, I was just basically gonna ask you, like, how did you, like, find clients? Like, how did you decide, like, okay, I need to find clients to do this one specific thing, and you had already done so many different things? Like, how did you focus in on one thing?
Well, I didn't immediately overnight. I had to test different services, and I had to figure out what I could offer that was not going to soak up all of my time per week. And I landed now, I'm like, okay, what I know I'm personally very good at is problem solving. People can give me impossible problems, and I will figure out some way of like making it work, right? And I started essentially also too realizing that if I was gonna actually make this work, I had to start stepping out as a human being, as Jane and not boss Baines. Because that was partially why things were falling apart, was because I wasn't able to make a living as myself. People were assuming I was making a living from the nonprofit. It was this very weird negotiation. But yeah, I realized I had to step out as myself more and step outside of the nonprofit a bit more and be clear and open about the things that I could do. I had to write a bio for myself. I didn't have a bio in 2017. Things like that, very small steps. But I started using this kind of as a framework to do that. So I wrote all this stuff down. This was like my experiment. I was like, all right, girl, these are all the things you're playing with. This is all the resources you have. This is all the stuff that you need. We're going to experiment month over month. We're going to see what works, what doesn't. We're going to check in on this plan month over month. We're going to edit it. We're going to make changes to the bio. We're going to see what happens with this and this. And that is at its core what a strategic plan is. It is a way to communicate these things with others, but it's also a way to audit and hold yourself accountable and to be like, okay, well, if I make this decision, if I decide to market myself in this way or do my art in this way, what does that mean for my values? It was also an opportunity to have those conversations with myself as stuff started to grow. Because that was actually one of my biggest fears in turning Bosses ATX into a more sustainable nonprofit, is that I had all these ideas that, like, if we had staff and if we had resources, that we would no longer be grassroots or have the same values that we had before, and that was holding me back. And that holds a lot of artists back too. This idea of selling out, and that idea is very, very real. But I had to figure out what I could live with, because I had to live, right? I had to survive. I think you had a question, we'll go this way.
So tied into what you just said about making a living, obviously most of us creatives are not thinking numbers, which is probably why most of us are here. And that being your business, how instrumental was that $400,000 number in your planning? Because you're saying at the end of the day, this is my strategic plan, this is my pinpoint. Because I'm kind of struggling coming with a number outside of just like going line by line, like dollar, like this is how much I'm bringing in right now, like CPA minded, right? Like how did that make a big difference to getting towards that goal, or?
Yeah, so I was going to try
before that, I guess.
Yeah, I was going to try to show you all this actually, because I have what my strategic plan looked like, but I can't get my internet to connect. Coco, could you help me actually? I'm like been over here trying to mess with my computer. I arrived at the 400K because I was like, the thing I need the most is help, and I want to pay people a modest living, and I want to be able to pay at least 4 people $60,000 a year. Like that's how I got to that 400K. And then I was like, well, if they have health insurance, it's gonna add this much. Like I didn't just like be like 400K is the answer. It was more so like, if I'm gonna get as much staff as I need and that the nonprofit needs, then that's where I need to go. But as I said, that was like the lofty vision that I'm working toward over the course of 5 years now. That was not my goal by the end of 2017. It was just like, I need to see if I can fundraise $500 from sponsors. That's it.
So you were looking at like a 5-year plan by that
Well-
point, by the end of 2017 or whatever that was, that you were like, okay, I'm gonna only do 500 this year, let's see what next year looks like?
Well, I mean, I don't think I was being that intentional with it, and I would actually peel that back for yourselves too. Like, just think genuinely, like, what do you need? And if it's something that you're realizing, well, that's gonna take me 5 years to get to, well then yeah, you've got a 5-year strategic plan on your hands. But if it's something you can get to within a year, then that's just a year, you know? But I think what I knew at that time, when I put that 400K on the table as something I was gonna have to try to fundraise or get our operational revenue to, I was like, I'm at 70 now, and 70 of that is going back into expenses. Like, I just don't see how I'm gonna do that within a year, like, without freaking out. And for my values, I was like, I don't wanna live like this anymore. I don't wanna be working 80 hours a week. And that was a choice I had to make. So this is kind of my holistic planning tool, and I'm gonna show y'all on my computer, and you can come up and look at it at the end of this, or I guess right now. But I now use this. So I now have like this document that I revisit every month, and what I am and what we do and who we serve hasn't changed in quite a long time. When I first started this, I didn't have any of that written down though. It was just like some sentences on a website. And maybe for the purposes of what you're doing, you're never gonna publish like all this info. But for us, we needed to, right? So none of that stuff has changed in quite a long time. Like the why, none of that. But what changes almost every single day is our financial plan and growth plan. And that's based on going through these questions once a quarter and tracking the data I need to answer these questions almost every week. So here you can kind of see. But I'm just keeping a mental tab and a written tab of like our growth potential and why we can only do the things that we can do and why we can't. I have it all written down in here. I'm sharing this with our board. I'm breaking down our finances. I'm refining, like, okay, these are the different categories we're spending stuff on. This is what our operational team looks like. This is what my personal energy looks like. This is how much time I think we're gonna have to spend next year if we try to reach this goal. All that sounds really intimidating and like a lot of stuff to put down, but you have to keep in mind, I just started out by asking myself these questions and building out tracking tools to keep track of all these things. And that's really all that a strategic plan or a business plan is. It's tracking what you're currently doing and where you're going to go and being able to display that information. So when it comes to finances, when it comes to money, all these things that we have really big, lofty, scary ideas about as creatives, money is just a tool. It can be a barrier, and it definitely is a barrier. We don't have enough of it, most of us. I argue most of us in this room don't. Probably. I'm making an assumption, but I think I'm right. But it is a tool. It is a number that we use to assign value to different things. So whether that's what you're assigning value to yourself, or if that's showing up in how you're spending money on different things within your business, it's a way of gauging with numbers each month what your work is adding up to. And I don't mean adding up to in terms of worth, but adding up in terms of impact. Like if you were to assign numbers to things, you could start seeing it in graphs and pictures and stuff like that. And that's really all that budgeting is. It's tracking this data that we put out every day, the money that we spend, the money that we get in. And so I started there actually, in terms of reaching this 400K. I was like, there's no way I'm gonna reach 400K in fundraising if I don't even know how much money we're bringing in and out every month. How am I even gonna do that? So I started tracking with like a really crazy budget sheet where I keep all these notes. And I still have an accountant, but I track everything once every 2 weeks because it's important data that I need to know if money is a goal that I have, right? Outsourcing my biggest goal to an accountant makes no sense. How are they gonna know the things that I know every single day about my business and about my customers and about my work and about my community? So I just started tracking, and this is what my crazy sheet looks like today. I don't know if you can see this, but well, yeah, I'll just scroll through it if I can get it to work. I literally track every single thing. Every single day. I make notes and I move them out by quarter. And then once I started doing this, I started grouping things into categories. And I was like, wait, if I look at the first half of 2018, we spent $4,000 on posters. Why the fuck did we do that? And then what if we spent $4,000 on a space instead? And that would mean that if we get rid of posters from what we're trying to do, and we divide that $4,000 into 4 months, oh, we could afford $1,000 a month in rent. Oh, look, this space opened up a couple of months later. We can afford that. Let's do it. Being able to track and stuff like this has helped me make those types of decisions a lot quicker and feel a lot less anxious when it comes to money. And if I lose, let's say a big sponsorship or an event doesn't go well, we don't do what we were projecting in ticket sales, I'm able to adjust and adapt and plan ahead. Be like, all right, that money's gone, where am I moving next? And I know all of you are here who are like, well, I just want to hire an accountant, I don't want to deal with all that. Do whatever you want to do, but I think if money is one of your goals, really understanding just what's coming in and out is the best place to start.
So my thing is that I'm very reactive and I get stuck in analysis paralysis. Think that everything's on fire. So I just get stuck and I don't even address the issue until it becomes a bigger fire, and then I'm like, okay, what do I need to do? So my thing, at least my next step is kind of like having systems to track time so that way I know how much time I'm spending overthinking and in that analysis paralysis state. But like, what are some systems that you've taken to understand, okay, I'm spending way too much effort and time on this? How did you?
Yeah, I can show you. So, time is a big one because as I mentioned, one of the only resources I had at that point in time was I had quit my full-time job, so I had more time. So I started doing this thing called calendar blocking. I don't know if y'all have heard of it. Oh my God, I can do this again. Thank you. So I calendar block. Oh, my computer's about to die. You see that? So I started blocking out times in the calendar. And then I got really ambitious, and beyond planning my own time, I just started tracking how I was spending my time. So like, instead of using my calendar as a tracking tool, I was instead making notes about what I actually did, and then looking back on that week. And one of the biggest things that came out of doing that at that point in time, and you'll have to remember, I did not just like wake up one day and start doing all these things. This took like months and years. Like, we're 2 years away from September 2017. One of the things that came up though in that time is that I was spending like 10 hours a week meeting with people, and then I was feeling really socially burned out, and I couldn't answer really important sponsorship emails, which were already taking me like a lot of social energy. And that I didn't feel like I could even compute like research I was trying to collect because I felt so burnt out socially. So I stopped taking meetings for 2 months, like with new people. I was like, I'm just gonna stop. And that was my experiment. I was like, what if I just cut all that out? And then there you go, I had 10 extra hours a week. But it's like those little things like that we overlook because we're doing things on our own, or we're in analysis paralysis, like there's no solution here, and you're just like, oh, I'm just gonna wait and it'll go away or whatever. And sometimes the answers are very practical. It's as simple as like, I really cannot afford to take 2-hour meetings every week with random strangers who just want to have coffee for 30 minutes and then I cry in the parking lot because I am too tired and hit somebody in the lot. Like, there's all sorts of things we do when we're burnt out and we're exhausted that cause more and more problems. And so stuff like that, being able to really track like where I was spending my energy and looking at that. And I don't know if this is like incredibly apparent, but all this is tracking. It's tracking where you are, what you're doing, how you're spending things, where things are coming from. That's all you're doing. You're taking the data that you collect every single day and putting it down on paper so you can do something with it. It's not anything bigger than that. So I just started developing tracking tools. And time blocking works really well for me because I can actually look at my calendar when someone asks me to do something and be like, no, I cannot do that thing. Thank you. Or even bigger than that, like if I take on a really big project, I will time block all the way back from that project, and then I'll be like, no, I actually can't do that by August 10th or whatever. I have to, like, there's no way I can do that until November 13th. Like it's helped me make those types of decisions as well, and not create environments that I'm literally not going to survive in.
So, like, I've tried doing the calendar thing too, but like, I don't have a full-time job anymore. I'm like mostly doing studio time. That's like my favorite thing to do. It's like for a little once, like I'm like done with my full-time job, and all of a sudden I just have all my time to make art. And it's really hard for me to like follow the schedule that I've actually written down for myself. Like, like make dinner at 6:30. But then I'm like, no, I got Cheerios, he's fine, I don't need to make dinner. Like, and then I just don't actually end up doing it. And then by the time I look at the clock again, it's like 2 a.m. Like, I've done studio time for like the full day. And like, do you have like tips on like how to motivate yourself to follow a schedule? Even though the phone is going off and like, you're supposed to like go to do the other thing.
I do think talking to people about it is great. And I don't know if you talk to people about it and like put what you're trying to do out into the universe. But telling someone, like me at this point, telling my partner, hey, I'm trying to heal from depression and anxiety. So I know in order to do that, I need to eat more regularly and I need to sleep more regularly. And if you see me wilding out, I need you to tell me to chill, I think accountability is a great way of like really putting out into the world like what you're trying to accomplish and what you need. The other thing I would suggest though is like incentivizing, like actually incentivizing yourself. So I hate talking to sponsors. I don't know if it's apparent, but that's like a huge issue for me. Like I just can't do it. It drains my energy. And so I started doing this thing where I'm like, all right, girl, you can talk to 10 sponsors this week. You can just get there with it. You can get there with 10 sponsors this week. Like you deserve a latte every morning. Like that's something that I'll be like, I'm going to the fancy coffee shop to get my latte. Like that's my thing, right? So I think you have to figure out what that thing is. Like, okay, that thing, that guilty pleasure you'll give yourself permission for. And also, it is 8 o'clock. I don't want to keep y'all too long. I realize we went through a ton of information. I know you probably have a couple more questions, and I'm happy to stick around and answer them. But I want to close with just big picture. This is a framework of tracking data that you already have. You already have this. It's just a matter of writing it down and making changes and adapting as stuff in your life moves and flows and opportunities come up and all of that. This is not stuff you're generating out of nowhere. This is just a framework for tracking and you're gonna fill it in. So however you keep track of deadlines, I would really love if you set a deadline, a reminder, whether that's a calendar on your Google Cal or whatever, to look back at what you wrote here in a month. Just start there. Just look back at what you wrote here in a month. And the only thing that this is good for is auditing and editing and adapting and changing. If it exists in a static form, it's just something you wrote down in a stupid goal mapping exercise on a Wednesday night in Austin, Texas. It doesn't mean anything unless you plug data into it. So I want to see you all set that reminder for a month. I'm looking. Wherever you keep track and look back at this. Cool. Did I lose all of y'all? We're doing okay? Are we feeling like a little overwhelmed?
Yeah.
Just a little? Yeah. I was like an excited overwhelmed. If all of this is overwhelming, again, it's totally chill. Life is overwhelming. And just plug in this data and keep pushing, and I promise this, you'll start to better understand the environment you need to create for your project to thrive, for the things you're trying to do to thrive. Because the three things you need for anything to succeed are visibility, education and access to resources, and money, some sort of capital or currency. Which is unfortunate, but it's capitalism. We're just trying to figure it out. So, yes, come back to this, be patient with yourself. You're doing big work, you're not required to be everything at once, and it's okay for everything you wrote tonight to change. Life changes. Thanks, y'all.